Another week and another time for us to take a look at the newest installment of the AP poll, because there are some shakeups and there are some areas in which I don't agree and we need to get into it. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you agree with the AP poll? And if you disagree, let me know where. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content, and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy that content, be sure to like and comment down below. But with all of that being said, let's take a look at this, and we'll go with the top 10. We have Alabama at 1, Georgia at 2, Oregon at 3, OU at 4, Iowa 5, Penn State 6, Texas A&M coming in at 7, Cincy at 8, 9 being Clemson, and finally Ohio State at 10. And we'll start with the top 4 as we always do. Alabama retaining the number 1 place. They're lucky they got out of Gainesville the way they did, especially for the team to play as flat as they did after they came out so aggressively. This Crimson Tide team has a lot of ability, but right now they have got some things to work on as well. The offensive line has got to come together. The defensive line in its interior has got to be a bit more stout because Florida really gashed them. Now, luckily for the Crimson Tide, you get Southern Miss this weekend. You get some opportunity to work through some things, to get some things ironed out before you ultimately have to play Ole Miss. But Alabama has got to get some things figured out because Ole Miss is a team that has looked really solid this year, and they have a quarterback who is spreading the ball around with ultimate effectiveness. Next, at Georgia. Georgia's a team where I've seen some people put them at number 1, and this is what I'll say. There's no denying that Georgia hasn't looked great this year. They had their first game against Clemson in which they took down a top-ranked opponent. The defense looked fantastic, and they ultimately got out of there with a W, and everything they've done since has just been win and go out there and execute. So I'm not mad at the Georgia at 1 arguments, but here's what I will say in Alabama's favor. No matter where you do put Miami, at this point in time, they do have 2 ranked wins on their schedule. Miami not being ranked anymore, but they did just come out of Florida with a ranked win, so there is that for the Crimson Tide. But Georgia is a team we have to watch because all they have done after that Clemson game and all they did during the Clemson game was go out and win a football game that was incredibly hard fought through 4 quarters, and they've just followed that up with looking really consistent on all sides of the ball ever since. So Georgia at 2 makes sense. At 3 and 4, we have a flip-flop because at 3 last week we had Oklahoma. This week we have Oregon. Oklahoma now sits at that number 4 spot, whereas last week that number 4 was Oregon. And look, I don't disagree with this. Oregon's in a position where last week they went to Ohio State and downed them at home. That right there is a really rare thing to see, and Oregon did it without 2 of their premier defensive players. Now, I understand Ohio State hasn't looked the best, but that's still a really quality road win. Whereas Oklahoma had Nebraska at home, it's an old rivalry game, so things are going to get heated. But that offense isn't clicking the way many people expected it to. And in many cases, if I would have told you 3 years ago that Oklahoma would have been held to under 30 points by Nebraska, there is a good amount of people that would have thought that they could have lost that game. However, this year, Oklahoma's defense is actually keeping up their end of the bargain. That front is looking really solid. Nick Bonito is having himself a year, but Spencer Rattler and the offense just aren't quite coming together in the way they probably should right now. Rattler having all the ability you could possibly want, but his decision-making has been questionable. I think this is something that can get ironed out. I mean, he has Lincoln Riley as his head coach, a brilliant offensive mind, so in that regard, I do believe Oklahoma's offense can get it ironed out, but for this week, I don't mind at all Oregon hopping Oklahoma because Oklahoma struggled against a team that, in all actuality, they probably should have handled easier than they did, especially when you look at how Nebraska really shot themselves in the foot multiple times throughout the course of that game. Oklahoma probably should have came out of there with a wider margin of victory than they did. At 5, Iowa. Iowa's a team that also has a few ranked wins in their back pocket this year. They're a team we need to watch because they've looked really good. The Big Ten right now has some questions, and it's actually going to be really interesting to see how the Big Ten all comes together with the downing of Ohio State. But Iowa is a team we all need to keep an eye on because they're putting together a really quality schedule right now. Penn State at 6, coming off of a fantastic victory in the whiteout against ranked Auburn, in which we found out a lot about each team. Franklin's Penn State Nittany Lions are rebounding really well after last year's season, something that I was asking whether or not we thought they could do before this season, but there's no doubt as to why James Franklin's name is attached to a high-profile coaching job such as USC. He's got the Penn State Nittany Lions looking really solid. At 7 is A&M, and once again, I don't disagree. A&M has had its struggles, but with Zach Calzada, they're actually starting to get in the flow of their offense, albeit they haven't played a really, really good team to get tested in that regard yet, but the offense has come a bit further since Zach Calzada took over at quarterback, so that's going to be something we have to watch and see. Cincinnati pulls out of a thriller against Indiana, a game that was a ton of fun to watch. If y'all got to see that game, I really enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought about it. But Cincinnati at 8, and the interesting thing about Cincinnati at 8 is they could be a team that's in for a rise, because within the next few weeks, they're going to be playing Notre Dame, who comes in at this list at number 12. And if they can get a good win out of that game, that's a real quality win for Cincinnati, a win that could vault them. At 9 and 10 is ultimately where I find my disagreement, with Clemson and Ohio State. Clemson this weekend really struggled with the Georgia State. Look, Clemson's defense is phenomenal. They have got a lot of talent on that defense, and they're playing high-level football right now. But that offense is, to put it bluntly, anemic. They're having no luck on offense right now. Tony Elliott's scheme is being picked apart by opposing defenses, and DJU doesn't look like the DJU we saw last year, to be quite frank. And that's something that has got to come together, because right now, it's pretty hard for me to justify putting Clemson inside the top 10 when they already have a loss, albeit to a Georgia team who I do believe is the legitimate number 2 team in the nation. Even then, it's hard for me to grant that, because they have looked so poor on offense. And when I'm looking at this list, there are teams that I'm looking at that don't have a loss, but have looked better on offense, maybe not as good defensively, but the total package leads me to believe they could do something. And that's where I'm sitting with Clemson. It's really hard for me to put them within the top 10, but likewise with Ohio State. In Ohio State's case, not only is the offense not clicking as it should, though it's not in the state of Clemson's, their defense is not very good. I mean, their defense is not very good at all this year, and they've been getting tested game in, game out. Ultimately, the team that I'm looking at in this top list for the AP poll is Ole Miss, sitting at 13. Ole Miss this weekend absolutely dismantled Tulane. Coral is out here having himself a season, and this is a team that if their defense continues to progress, this is a scary unit. The offensive capability of Ole Miss is one that needs to be respected. They have got a veteran quarterback that is in year 2 of this system, and they are rearing ready to go. So that's a team that we need to watch, we need to keep an eye on, because I think Ole Miss deserves to be ranked higher. If it was up to me, I'd actually have Ole Miss within the top 10, because the media at large was very complimentary of Tulane and how they attacked Oklahoma, myself included. I thought Tulane really schemed well against Oklahoma. Oklahoma should have beaten them more, no doubt, but Tulane did a really good job. And Ole Miss went out there and battered them. So Ole Miss is a team that I think we need to keep an eye on, especially being an Alabama fan like myself. With the Crimson Tide set to play them in 2 weeks, there's a lot on the Crimson Tide's agenda that they need to address before they get to Ole Miss, and thankfully they have a tune-up game in between now and then. Let me know what you're thinking about the AP rankings, especially within this top 10, because there are some areas in which I disagree, and I'm very interested to hear your opinion. And don't forget to tune in at 5:30 this evening, Central Time, for my live stream. I'm going to be having a very special guest. We're going to be going over the whole slate of college football. It's going to be a great time, and we'd love to have you. That's it. See ya.